welcome to the Better Gaming Show, the event and podcast series dedicated to all aspects of ethical gambling and how we can make it safe, secure and socially balanced for everyone. My guest today is Dr. Jakob Jonsson, a psychologist specializing in responsible gambling and a senior consultant at Sustainable Interaction. Now, in this episode, we're going to talk through a recent story which piqued my interest. It all involves Eden Hazard and the promotion of an unregulated gambling operator in the Belgium jurisdiction. The operator is Stake, which is not a surprise to anyone. And Jakob featured in the story with commentary covered by iGaming, but I wanted to talk in more detail about aspects of that story and the further implications. Before we do that, Jakob, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
It's great to have you on and affording the time. We've got plenty to talk about with regards to that story. But before we do that, can you just give me a quick rundown of your responsible gambling experience, your current role and the work of Sustainable Interaction?
Sure. Well, I've been working in the field of problem gambling since like 35 years. Basically, I'm a trained clinical psychologist and been with Sustainable Interaction for the last 20 years or something. I've been working with the industry with responsible gambling, harm minimization since late 90s. And I've also been involved in research like prevalence studies, care calls, interventions, and so on a more like a research side. So Sustainable Interaction, we're working with, for example, self-tests, online trainings, live trainings regarding harm minimization and trying to prevent gambling problems in different angles.
I was on your website, and obviously in the work that I'm doing at the moment, there were aspects of it that really piqued my interest. One, I think there was an article recently, you've been doing some work on responsible gaming, advertising and pop-ups and whether they work. And you've done some interesting work with, is it Nord's tipping?
Almost right. Norsk tipping.
That's it.
Sorry for my Norwegian. And there I've mainly been working with their care calls, doing large RCTs, comparing like making a phone call, sending a postal letter and having a control group with very good effect, I would say. Over a year's time, they're down 30% looking at theoretical loss. A little bit surprising to me, these calls were very much appreciated by the customers. And 1 year after the intervention, that was on an average like a 6 minutes phone call. Around 95% of the customers were still customers then, and there were no difference between the control groups and those that were contacted by telephone. And these calls are basically motivational, but they're also looking at affordability. It's about checking if people know how much they've lost during the last time period, and you often choose the one that I would say hurts the most. It could be the last month, 3 months, or last year. So this kind of reality check involved here. You get the question, do you know how much or what's your guess how much you lost during the last 3 months? And then you get feedback on it. And all these calls aims for action, that they are taking action regarding setting limits, preferably if it's possible to lock the limit. And sometimes, of course, it's about self-exclusion and treatment referral as well. Even though treatment referral is quite uncommon, I would say it's like below 5% of the calls.
Okay. It's just that you mentioned on self-exclusion there, because again, when I was on your company's website, and one of the products that you offer is the Restart, which is a safe way for people. Is this if I get anything incorrect, just correct me promptly. But the Restart program, whereby anybody who has previously self-excluded, you offer sort of a safe route back, as it were. Just from my instinct alone, I was just like, I'm not too sure about that. But then I guess, there needs to be that level of insight and education, because there will be people that will want to return to gambling after self-excluding.
Yes, people are returning after self-exclusion, definitely. So I would say anything is better than nothing. So if it's possible to remind the customer for the reasons why they did self-exclude, it could help them in setting different limits and so on when returning. This said, it's probably much more effective to make them another good choice while self-excluding. And Norsk Tipping have tried that during their Spillepulse project, the Gambling Pulse project. And the findings there really said that it's better to do it while people are self-excluding. So their new limits is already in place when they return, because otherwise they tend to like start to play as they did when they actually self-excluded. Even though these customers also often have the thought of, okay, I'll just play a little bit. And I'll do it in a controlled manner this time. But quite soon, many of them accelerate their gambling instantly. And this is due to the tolerance effect, really. So it's quite what we could expect with these customers. I did some years ago an 11-year follow-up of former problem gamblers within the Svelogs project. And these were people that had had some kind of gambling problems sometimes during their life. And during this, at the 11-year follow-up, I think it was like 90% of them did gamble still.
Okay.
But not all of them had problems. Actually, that was a minority of them that reported problems. I mean, of course, that means we don't really know actually if they did have problem or not, but they did not report problems in the follow-up interview. But what was obvious was it mattered a lot what kind of gambling product you were gambling at. So if you gamble at high risk or medium high risk gambling products, there was a much higher risk that you experienced problems 11 years at the follow-up interview, really. So we know that people tend to come back. People with gambling problems tend to come back, and these are and the industry, regulators, treatment people like me, we need to handle it or try to handle it as good as possible.
Yeah, I think that was my sentiment or my takeaway as soon as I saw it. Inherently, I thought, I just didn't feel comfortable with it. But then that is the realities of, the industry that we're in and I guess people's human behavior that, there will be people returning from self-exclusion and it's better to be equipped with tools and education and all elements that the operators and the regulators can lean into to best support those ones that are coming back.
And of course, as a researcher and also working with harm minimization, we need to try to figure out what kind of measures are effective and which ones are not. My general take on this is that mandatory measures are much more effective than voluntary ones, for example. And this tells me that there's a strong need of regulation regarding these harm minimization measures. And really.
Okay, yeah. I think the other thing as well is, as you were just talking there, because I just think that can drive things, underground to some degree when it comes to addiction and, to harm minimization, I guess.
Yeah, true. And I think for me, we have been focusing a lot on overconsumption. Since overconsumption, when you're overconsuming something, it's not about addiction. It's not about, there's no real stigma doing something a little bit more or maybe much more than I actually wanted or planned to do. So trying to target overconsumption, I think, is a good take on it, trying to prevent it earlier. And that's also something that we see in that there's a coming paper on different kinds of triggers for care calls. And not surprisingly, they're seeing that if you target groups earlier in their, so to say, problematic career, it's better. You reach more and then do more action. That we see a bigger change in the gambling habits and so on.
Okay, well, that all leads into the main thrust of this episode. And as mentioned, you featured in an iGaming article, which was focused on the former Belgian football star Eden Hazard, who has become a global brand ambassador for Stake. For those unaware of Stake, Stake are an unregulated crypto-based online casino that isn't licensed in Belgium and it's not licensed in the UK. And it's not licensed in quite a few countries. The deal with Eden Hazard is primarily, as mentioned, an ambassadorial role. And there was a big press release about him in the build up to this year's World Cup. You featured in the article, Jakob, and touched on quite a few points, because I think the article and that whole relationship between Eden Hazard and an unregulated casino operator touched on quite a few different elements in regard to questions about the responsibilities of not only sports personalities, regulators and operators, but also this burgeoning black market movement. When you were asked to comment on the article, what were the overriding concerns that you had with regard to this increasing activity of sports stars endorsing unregulated casinos and operators?
Well, overall, I find it very problematic. And for me, it's not really about a gray zone or a gray area. For me, in this case, I'm a little bit black and white. And there's also, there are two huge industries meeting here. We have the gambling industry and we have the sports industry, because sports today is actually a huge industry with enormous financial interests and so on going on. And for me, there's another take on it, is that if you're a football star or a former football star, it comes with a responsibility, I think, as a kind of moral responsibility, since people are looking up to you, and I think it's important, whatever you're making commercials for, you should be able to stand for it. You should want to use this product yourself. You would think that, would it be okay for my kids to do things like this and so on. So, because there is definitely an ethical side and thinking before you accept different kinds of commercial offers is extremely important, I think.
When it comes to influencers, and because influencers are another sort of subsector of this story. But when it comes to influencers and sports stars, do you think they interrogate the nature of the relationship? For example, in the UK, there's an influencer who I found to be quite warm and genuine and sincere person. They're called the United Strand, and basically vowed not to cut their hair until Man United won 5 games in a row. And he's built up quite a long and big following, because I think it's over 600, 700 days, and his hair's getting out of control. So it's really doing. But there was an instance where it looked like Man United would be winning their 5th game in a row, and he did a live stream. And it was at that point that he really monetized all of his following, and Stake were again one of the people that he had secured support from. And it just really disappointed me that people and influencers and sports people would just do this unregulated element. But I guess they could push back to some degree and just go, well, they are regulated in some obscure international territory and they've got international appeal. So why shouldn't they take that money?
I think the global gambling industry, in a way, have succeeded in talking about the grey market. And for me, there is no grey market. Either you have a license, an allowance to offer your games restrictions in a jurisdiction, or not. And if not, then you're a black sheep or a black cat in that market, definitely. So this talk about the grey market and so on only adds confusion. And actually, who are the black market? And then the industry often talks about that they are real criminals. They are the real crooks here. But then we have the grey market that is somewhere in between. And if you look at many of the companies that are on the Swedish license market today, we opened up our market back in 2019. They were black companies back in the days before the regulation, before the license market turned up, because we had kind of a monopoly system in Sweden. They weren't grey. They argued they were grey because they had hold a Malta license or a Curacao license or a Gibraltar license or anything, but they are black. Were black back in the days. And nowadays, of course, they're complaining about the companies that are targeting the Swedish market without a license. And I agree with them. But some years ago, they were themselves that hold that position. So being an influencer And not knowing about this case, I was glad that Leeds United did beat Man United the other day, last week, since it's my favorite British or English team.
Leeds United.
Yeah, unfortunately, I must say. Yeah, it's been, they were good back in the 70s and
I
so
was
on.
going to say, was it the 70s period or the 90s period where they were just...
The 70s for me, yeah. But the 90s period was good as well until they lost all their money.
Well, that was a big bet, right?
Yes, they lost. But being an influencer, of course, for me, need to secure, as I see it, that this company that I am promoting here in my jurisdiction with my followers and so on, that they actually have a permission to offer the games in the country I'm in, really. So, and I can't see any compromises here, really. They should.
Just on that point, because there's another point with regard to the responsibilities, which I'll move on to in a bit, but I've also seen an instance of an influencer who spends the majority of their time promoting crypto casinos pretty much on a consistent basis. They're always wearing a baseball cap. I won't name them because I don't want to name the other company, but that influencer was also used by a regulated UK operator. And when I saw that, it was good. I mean, I had nothing against the ad, but I did think, why as a regulated operator would you then use an influencer or an online personality that is clearly taking money from the black market when that is your biggest competitor or your biggest threat as a thing? And then I just kind of got into a spiral of, should the operators be looking at their responsibility when they're doing their promotions as well in these sort of instances? Like, for example, will Eden Hazard or anybody connected with that promotion be used by a regulated operator?
I can see the inner logic from the gambling company, the regulated gambling companies' point of view, in a way, that they want to they're competing about market shares, being at the same advertisement spot in a way with this influencer. That said, of course, I think they should say no thanks to this and not having this commercial relationship with this influencer. And for me, it also the same goes with the relationship with suppliers of their online slots, for example. If this supplier are selling the same product to the black market, they shouldn't buy the same ones, in my book, because it's like voting with your wallet in a way. But probably there are very strong financial incentives here for these companies to do as they do and not saying no thank you and keep on cooperating. So it's my guess that the money talks here, and I don't like it at all. But that's my qualified guess.
With regard to, there's obviously quite a few stakeholders at play that could impact it. You've got the sports bodies who could be drawing a line under it. Say, for example, in the Premier League, with regard to the ban on front of shirt ads. But then at the same time, Stake are still a front of shirt sponsor for Everton, even though their license that got retracted a year and a half ago, and Everton still did it. So you've got like the sports bodies, you've got the sporting clubs, you've got the regulated industries, the operators and the personalities. With so many people that could impact it, it's very easy for others just to there go, well, that's not our responsibility. For the regulator to say that's down to the sports bodies, and the sports bodies to say that's down to the clubs, and the clubs to say, well, it's down to the individual personalities. And with that, the apportioning of blame and responsibility, these are getting really, really tricky times, especially with the story that we're talking about, whereby you've got all of those, and then you've got the almost this borderless digital ecosystem, because we're operating in a different time now where, everything's online, the boundaries are blurred. So how do you take this forward in terms of, trying to solve this problem?
Well, in ice hockey, there is this saying that you're responsible for your own stick. So, and I think it goes here as well. So, like every single actor here are still responsible for their own actions and needs to be reminded about this. And of course, there will be, no matter what the Football Association in UK, what kind of measures they're taking, there will still be illegal betting or betting from illegal sites on their games, of course. That would still happen. But, we're in a world right now where the FIFA could handle out a peace prize. So in a way, anything is possible. Mr. Trump got it. But of course, they should really take their responsibility. And that goes for the single influencer, for the football associations, for the clubs and so on. And of course, it must be tempting for a football club like Everton to say yes to an offer, but they should actually say no, since it's an unlicensed brand that they are making commercials for on their shirt. So, and I think it's as often as possible to remind regulators, to remind companies, influencers, and so on about this as much as possible, to make it some kind of friction here. I don't know about the case in UK really, but if we look at the popularity for the gambling industry and the gambling companies in Sweden, it's very low. Their reputation is quite bad, quite close to the Hells Angels motorcycle club in reputation. And they should be worried about that, I think, and what their acts are influencing these things.
When you just mentioned there about friction is one of the things that is often cited with regards to black market operators versus regulated. In the UK, there's been a lot of talk about that recently with the British horse racing authorities, who have questioned the affordability checks that are taking place right now, and they say it's to the detriment of the industry. And a recent person who advocated for affordability checks is now saying that it's almost been done heavy-handed and well beyond the remit of what they were suggesting. Is this friction aspect a really big part of the battle between regulated and black market operators?
Well, over the years, of course, I've seen quite a lot of bad user experience. Good things that are, how do you say it? They make it in a bad way. So it's quite tricky for the customer to there's an unnecessary friction built in. One problem here is that we are quite late in the process quite often. That it would be easier and customers would accept some kind of friction early in the process. So we need to build in more of these things earlier in the process when becoming a customer or early in your career as a customer, so on. But because I really, there is a lot of friction at gambling companies. Sometimes it's a friction when you want to withdraw your money. At some companies, still today, 2026, it could take up to 3 days for you to get your money. And you could actually say that, well, let's postpone this, so I cancel my withdrawal so I could play with it again. And that's, for me, definitely friction. And of course, they could do it, since it's 2026, within seconds, this withdrawal process. I don't think that's the friction is the big thing between playing regulated or unregulated. But of course, for these high value customers, among them we find quite many that actually are experiencing severe gambling problems or moderate gambling problems, but they are experiencing problems. And here, of course, some of them are voting with their feet. So when they experience some kind of friction, some kind of, for example, an affordability check, they move to another company. In Sweden, I think most of them actually move to another licensed company, since there are 60 or 70 to choose between in a population of 10 million Swedes. But sometimes, of course, they move to an unregulated side. And for me, it's better if we had prevented them becoming this high-value customer, or from another perspective, this problematic customer that are spending more than they actually could afford.
One element that you were just talking about there that just sort of popped into my head was the aspect of the friction and people's experiences. And I think it's just important just to highlight that, gambling isn't the only one that is experiencing this. Pretty much it's a line too, but, the financial services industry is very much the same as well. And that's why you have a lot of people who want to use crypto because of the amount of restrictions when they're just doing legitimate money moves between accounts, specifically from my experience as well. And I think people often assume that there is an invasion of privacy, or, where it's not. Is essentially what they're just trying to do is to make sure that there's no fraud being undertaken, and just to do checks and measures on KYC and AML activities. So that's on that. But sustainable interaction is obviously promoting a lot of good solutions for operators. And just with regard to the operators that you're working with, is, in these situations that we've just been discussing for the last 10, 15, aspect of being an ethically good company and considerate company, will it be moving towards being a competitive edge in the coming years? And are you seeing an increase in people and operators wanting to be more responsible within this field?
The short answer is yes. I think we see this movement, and being a responsible company is in customer relations. I think it's an edge. Being trustworthy, taking care of you as a customer. And you mentioned KYC and AML, and for me it's a quite natural connection here between this and affordability checks, and quite often more like accepted by the industry doing these AML checks and so on. But I think it's a competitive edge. And I would say also that we look at big global multinational companies that are in many jurisdictions and having licenses in many jurisdictions. They are getting better and better in their work with preventing gambling problems, even though there's still a long way to go, I must say, really. So we're far from there, and we will probably not ever get there, having this, being able to prevent gambling problems, like having a zero aim, say zero target or problem gambling. One interesting thing for me is when you talk about, the share that plays regulated, and then we have the negative channelization with customers playing at unregulated, at the black market. When we look at the percent figures, it's always about the money. What kind of percentage of the money that are spent on the black market, not the number of people or the share of customers that actually are spending this money on the black market. Because that, of course, from the industry point of view and from the regulator's point of view, it's of course interesting, because this group that are playing unregulated, they are high consumers many of them are high consumers and are, in that sense, high value customers. So it really hurts seeing them playing abroad or unregulated for the companies and for the regulators, of course. And there are, as we know, like less measures helping them, or like safeguards around them on the unregulated market, really.
I think the main problem with the operators and the industry as a whole, really, when it talks about the black market, is that the cynical people will just be thinking that they're not worried about harm, and they're not worried about the people and the consumers that could be at risk. It's more of a protectionism aspect that they just want to protect their market share against these black markets.
Yeah, they're worried about the money at the end of the day. It's probably very true.
Yeah. Just to close it off, what would you think would be the best way in terms of influencers and sports stars in educating them about the impact of them endorsing and taking sponsorships from black market and unregulated operators? Is there a way forward in which the industry or somebody could educate these individuals to look and be more ethically minded when they're looking at sponsorship packages?
Yeah, I guess so. Not knowing like the solution here, but if you look at like sports, football players, I guess they have quite a lot of spare time, free time, since they can't be training more like 3 or maximum 4 hours a day if it's an intensive day. So I think the clubs and the associations could do a lot regarding this, educating their actually it's their staff in a way, the players. So there's a lot to do, and I think it would be nice to have like joint ventures between regulators, associations, and the gambling regulated industry here, trying to educate and like working definitely on the like ethical side of these influences and players' minds in many ways. And here I think, I think getting to meet someone with a lived experience, someone that tells them about how this influenced and sometimes ruined or badly hurt me, but not only me, also my kids, my family, my employer, and so on. Listening to these stories, understanding that this isn't any product. For me, I would say that the gambling goes together with like alcohol. It's something that are mind changing, positive in many ways for many, but also there's a dark side associated with addiction, overconsumption, and so on that is very problematic as well. So it's understanding it's not any product.
One of my, just harking back to your 1970s Leeds team, anytime I look at lived experience, I really value the work that they do. But invariably, a lot of the lived experience when it comes to sports stars are from footballers from a bygone age that won't really resonate much with, either people, certainly the younger generation or the preventative aspects of it. So say, for example, there's a whole load of 80s footballers that I know are talking about lived experience, but my son is only interested in footballers, from the last 5 or 10 years. And on the flip side, if you were to start involving them in there, going back to that cynical aspect of protectionism, there could be the argument that if the operators were looking to do a campaign to make people aware of it, they could be accused of, sowing the seeds of gambling patterns or activity through a gambling harm program that appeals to younger people. So damned if you do and damned if you don't in these situations, aren't you?
Yeah, and I think you really got a point here. I would say that in Sweden lately, we have seen more like people still in their sports career or that are quite recently retired. And that's an advantage, I think, when they talk about their experience of overconsumption and mainly like having a gambling disorder. But that's really a point.
Yeah. Well, this feels like a good point to end this episode. I've really enjoyed chatting to you today, Jakob. It's been super insightful. I know that you've got like years and years of experience in the gambling harm space, and it's really interesting what you're doing with your company and the insights that you've provided today. I think we've sort of touched on quite a few things, and it'd be great to get you on another time maybe and to talk specifically with regard to the tools and the trends within sort of RG aspects that you're working with operators across many jurisdictions, because I just think it's really interesting to see where the industry is going with regard to that. So thank you very much for your time. It's very much appreciated. Where's the best place for people to contact you if they've got any questions with regard to anything that we've discussed today?
I guess it's sending an email to Jakob, spelled with a K, at sustainableinteraction.se. It stands for Sweden.
Okay, so it's Jacob, is it? Have I been
mispronouncing?
Have I been mispronouncing you all day?
In Swedish, it's Jakob. So it's. But I think it's Jacob in it.
I'll get away with it.
Yeah, definitely. It's been it's been a pleasure, Jim, and I'd love to come back.
Brilliant. Okay, well, thanks very much again. And for anyone watching, if you've got any questions, I'll put the contact details in the show notes, and I will see you in the next episode. Hello and